Some years ago, Kim and I went to visit my daughter Kelly and her family who were living in Schaeferstown. And rather than trying to squeeze in with them for the night, we decided that it would simply be more comfortable to stay at a nearby bed and breakfast. There were several guests who stayed over that night, and in the morning, the hostess prepared a large country breakfast for us to enjoy. It was delicious. Quite by chance, I fell into conversation with a young woman who was sitting beside me on the subject of tattoos. And I'll be frank, I know nothing about tattoos whatsoever, but I did speculate that a tattoo must represent something very meaningful, that a person would want it permanently marked on their skin. And at least in her case, she said that was true. And she showed me her tattoo, which was a very small semicolon, ever so faintly tattooed upon her wrist. I mentioned, not being quite sure what to say about this, I mentioned, well, a semicolon represents and. And I asked her what it meant to her. And she told me about the boyfriend that she had had for a couple of years who had suddenly died, and how devastating it had been for her. Oh, she had lots of hopes and dreams for the future, but with his death, it was as if her world suddenly collapsed. It was as if her legs had just been knocked out from under her. And she said it took her a long, long time to get over it. And somewhere in the process, she got this tattoo as a sign of hope. And there is still more to come. There is still life to be lived. There are still other chapters to be written. And every day, as she saw that little semicolon on her wrist, it would remind her that there was more, that the future had opportunities and possibilities and promise. I thought that was the best tattoo story I had ever heard. Although, to be frank, I haven't made much of a collection of them. As Jesus shared the Last Supper with his disciples, he told them in clear, plain language that there would be terrible times ahead for himself as well as for them. He had repeatedly told them that he would be betrayed, he would be arrested and killed, and that after 3 days, he would rise again. He knew one of his disciples, one of his friends, would betray him to the authorities that very night. But for now, he warned them that just as the world hated him, the world would hate them as well. Just as the world will persecute me, the world will persecute you. People will think that by killing you, they are honoring God. The hour is coming. The hour is coming quickly when you will scatter in all directions and you will abandon me. In just a little while, you will no longer see me, and you will weep, and you will mourn, and you will feel great pain. The world will hate you because you belong to me. And in this world, you will face tribulation. The darkness is coming, the terrible night when evil would reign was upon them. But this is not the end of the story. There is also the good news. The dawn of the third day is coming. In a little while, the world will not see me, but you will see me. And because I live, you also will live. Your pain will turn to joy. Take courage, because I have overcome the world. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. I will not leave you as orphans. I will ask the Father, and he will give you an advocate. A Spirit of truth will abide in you and be with you. And in the midst of these words of encouragement, Jesus gave his disciples 3 imperatives. Number 1, abide in me. Stay rooted, stay grounded in my words and my teaching, in my example. There are a million distractions out there. Don't just set my words up on a shelf to collect dust. Don't leave them behind when you leave your church. Think about them. Talk about them. Live them. Apply them in order that you may bear much fruit. Paul later wrote to the Galatians saying that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And if you've mastered all those, there's another list, a different list you can find in 2 Peter chapter 1. More things you can work on as you apply the example and word of Jesus to your life and your relationships. Of course, the world around us is given to accumulation, to being competitive, to saying that they will never split the difference. They are given to winning at all cost. But where do these selfish attitudes lead us when we die? Jesus was sharing eternal truth that would lead us to eternal life. And most importantly, we call this Maundy Thursday, which comes from the Latin word for commandment, similar to a mandate. Jesus commanded his disciples to love one another. Be kind and considerate to one another. On this night, Jesus demonstrated his love and his humility by serving, by doing the work of a slave, by washing his disciples' feet. And he told his disciples that greater love has no man than this, than he lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. And finally, Jesus prayed, Father, protect them in your name, that they may be as one, that they may have my joy complete in themselves. Protect them from the evil one. Sanctify them in your truth. I ask not only on behalf of these 12, but on behalf of all those who will believe in me because of their word. And so you see, Jesus was praying for all of us that night.
Matthew 26, verses 20 to 25. When evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12, and while they were eating, he said, I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me." They were very sad and began to say to him one after the other, "Surely not I, Lord." Jesus replied, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him, but woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." Then Judas, the one who would betray him, said, "Surely not I, Rabbi." Jesus answered, "Yes, it is you."
The agony. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Could you men not keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. "Watch and pray, so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak." He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." When he came back, he again found them sleeping, because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the 3rd time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour is near, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer."
Luke 22, verses 47 to 53, the arrest. While he was still speaking, a crowd came up, and the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus asked him, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" When Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, "Lord, should we strike with our swords?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. But Jesus answered, "No more of this." And he touched the man's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come for him, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come with swords and clubs? Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns."
Luke 22, 54 to 62, the denial. Then seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance. But when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw them seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, "This man was with him." But he denied it. "Woman, I don't know him," he said. A little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." "Man, I am not," Peter replied. About an hour later, another asserted, "Certainly this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean." Peter replied, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him. "Before the rooster crows every day, you will disown me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly.
Mark 15, verses 1 to 15, the trial. Very early in the morning, the chief priests, with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin, reached a decision. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. "Are you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. The chief priests accused him of many things. So again, Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer? See how many things they are accusing you of." But Jesus still made no reply, and Pilate was amazed. Now it was the custom at the feast to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. "Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate, knowing it was out of envy that the chief priests had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. "What shall I do then with the one you call the king of the Jews?" Pilate asked them. "Crucify him," they shouted. "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him!" Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified.
Mark 15, 16 through 25, the way of the cross. The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is the praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get. It was the 3rd hour when they crucified him.
Luke 23, verses 32 to 46, the crucifixion. 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is Christ of God, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine, vinegar, and said, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was a written notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and save us." But the other criminal rebuked him. "Don't you fear God?" he said. "Since you are under the same sentence, we are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus answered him, "I tell you the truth. Today you will be with me in paradise." It was now about the 6th hour, and darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour, for the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." When he had said this, he breathed his last.